Good morning, good afternoon and good evening. Wherever you are and whatever you're doing, I hope you're having a fantastic day. Today I wanted to share with you the most fun weapons in the game to use, specifically focusing on their Ashes of War. I desperately tried to narrow this down to 10, but there are some incredibly awesome Ashes of War in this game. So I'm actually going to bring you a top 20. They are in some kind of order, especially the top 3, but most of the rest of them are all so amazing that the spots are interchangeable. So if I say it's in spot 17 or spot 12, they're still basically as good as each other, because as I say, there are so many really cool weapons and skills in this game, which is why I've had to include so many. There are literally hundreds of Ashes of War in this game. So if your favourite didn't make the list, it doesn't mean I don't think it's amazing. I just had to narrow it down somehow. So halfway through, I may do a few honourable mentions for you to try and squeeze a few more in, because I would love to include every single one of my top 50 in this list. But that would just make it a bit ridiculous. If you want to see much more Elden Ring content like this, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and please like the video as well if you enjoy. And without further ado, let's get into number 20, the Sword of Saint Trina. You'll find this weapon in the Forsaken Ruins near the Rockview Balcony Site of Grace in Caelid, and it's locked behind an imp gargoyle statue, so it does require a stone sword key to enter. The weapon itself doesn't have a crazy amount of damage. As we're reviewing the Ashes of War in this video, the Mists of Slumber is absolutely incredible, because it's the only way in the game to put enemies to sleep without using some kind of consumable item. Be it grease or pots or arrows, they all require crafting or purchasing. However, with this sword, you can put enemies to sleep infinitely, and it will make some incredibly hard fights and boss fights, such as the godskin duo, really easy. Not only does it release a purple mist that you see here, which inflicts the sleep ailment on foes, it also automatically coats your weapon with sleep as well, similarly to the sporific grease. And that is why this weapon gets a spot on this list. Now we'll move into number 19, the Wing of Astell. The Nebula weapon art carried me through a huge portion of the game. I love this weapon. You get this in a chest above Astell River once you have access to the northern section of Astell River and Noxtella. And honestly, the only reason it isn't higher up on the list is because the exploding magical balls that it creates take a second or two to explode, so it's very useless on faster enemies that can easily just walk away from the effect. Overall though, awesome weapon art. Now we'll move into number 18, the Great Club. This one really surprised me. I didn't expect it to have a cool, unique weapon art. I expected it to just be something like Endure or the Braggart's Roar. But no, Golden Land is very cool. You slam your weapon into the ground, dealing damage to anything caught in the initial thrust. It then explodes into a blast of energy, and it will then spawn and release golden darts at any enemy hit by that blast for even more follow-up damage. It is very slow and easy to be staggered, and that's the only problem with quite a few Ashes of War on this list, and the only reason it isn't higher. This is dropped by the Stone Digger Troll in the Old Altus Tunnel, which requires 2 Stone Sword keys to access. Now we'll move on to number 17, the Veteran's Prosthesis. This one is a reward for defeating Commander Nile in Castle Sol in the mountaintops of the Giants. And the Storm Kick is very cool, and it's actually one of the quicker Ashes of War on this list, which makes it a lot more viable than most. You initially thrust the prosthetic leg into the ground, creating a storm, and you can then follow up with a strong attack to perform a lightning-infused jumping attack. There's not much more to say about this apart from it is very cool, but also very hard to obtain because Commander Nile is an incredibly difficult boss, and obviously really late on in the game. Now we'll move into number 16, Pike's War Spear. You obtain this one by defeating Festering Fingerprint Vike, which you can do fairly early on in the game. It has inherent madness build-up, and its weapon skill, Frenzy Flame Thrust, is what we'll be focusing on, and it's a very cool Ash of War. You imbue the spear with the Flame of Frenzy and leap forwards into the air, plunging it in the ground and setting off a maddening explosion. This releases a 3-pronged wave of madness, and anyone stood in that will be damaged and start to receive the madness debuff. So it's incredibly good in PvP because it's hard to avoid, it's fast, it does a lot of damage, and madness is a lethal debuff. So all around, solid choice for a great weapon art. Now we'll move into number 15, Leonoras Poleblade. This is an incredibly cool Ash of War, fairly similar to the Waterfowl dance in ways. The only problem with it for me is you have to get up very close and personal, and with the pauses in between each part of the Bloodblade dance, you can be interrupted and knocked out of it. But left uninterrupted, it can do a crazy amount of damage, and then a follow-up input will see you perform another attack that ends with an evasive maneuver, which is very, very cool. And of course, you obtain this by defeating Eleonora near the end of Yura's questline. That takes us into number 14, Loretta's War Sickle. This is dropped by defeating Loretta, Knight of the Haligtree, at the end of the Haligtree. And the Ash of War is basically the magic version of the Angel's Wings Ash of War. Angel's Wings you get from the Winged Scythe, and it has the exact same animation, except that is with a faith scaling weapon, this is with a magic scaling weapon. This gets the upper hand because it also imbues your weapon with glintstone magic for the duration of the Ash of War, which just makes it look slightly cooler. Next up, we've got the 13th position with the Death's Poker. This one is rewarded by defeating the Deathrite Bird boss toward the southeast of the Aeonian Swamp in Caelid. And the Ghost Flame Ignition Ash of War does absolutely insane damage with a pure intellect build. The scaling of this weapon art is actually considerably higher than the scaling value would suggest, and it grants crazy damage, only diminishing when you get up to 50 intellect. After you thrust out the rod and set the tip alight with Ghost Flame, you can follow up with a normal attack to set the ground ablaze, or a strong attack to trigger a massive explosion. It is one of the more confusing weapon arts and took me a few goes to get my head around, and also because it's a two-parter before it really does anything, it's one of the slower ones as well, which is why it's not higher up on the list. But it still made it into the top 20 of a game with many, many Ashes of War, so it is still damn good. Now we'll move into number 12, Falling Star Beastjaw. This one is dropped by the full-grown Falling Star Beast at the top of Mount Gelmir, and its Ash of War Gravity Bolt is so friggin' powerful and quick that it is even used for certain hitless runs and other challenge runs such as speed runs. It can stagger most bosses in 2 to 3 hits. And what makes this so strong is the fact that it can be fired in quick succession, as you see here. You can just keep pumping that weapon and it will keep spamming gravity bolts. It's so strong. Now we'll move into number 11, the Ruin's Greatsword. This was another one that surprised me how cool the weapon art was. I assumed this was just going to be another boring big sword. But the wave of destruction is quite cool. For me personally, it's a not quite good version of the Taker's Flames, which we'll be coming up to later in the video. But if you're going for a strength int build, then this is a really decent alternative. This is acquired by defeating the Misbegotten Warrior Crucible Knight duo boss fight in the Redmane Castle Plaza. And as you see, just like I described, you raise the sword up and then strike it down, firing off a wave of gravitational force. Super cool and definitely worth having it in your arsenal if you're going for a really strength heavy based build. Now we're moving into the top half of the list, and at number 10 we have the Godskin Peeler. This one is acquired by defeating the Godskin Apostle at Windmill Village to the north of the Altus Plateau. And my god, does it look awesome! You spin the weapon around overhead and then slam it down into the ground to summon a raging vortex of black flames. It hits multiple times, so anything caught within this whirlwind will keep taking continual damage. It is chargeable, so you can hold it down to continue spinning that tornado for a bit longer, but even though the skill is chargeable, it doesn't get a damage increase with the Godfrey icon. So now we'll move into number 9, the Dragon Scale Blade. I swooned over this weapon during the Things You Missed in the Lake of Rot, though I haven't actually put it to proper use yet. The weapon itself has fairly low stat requirements and only requires strength and dex, so this is a great way to add a bit of elemental damage to your non-magic build. Because the Ash of War, which is what we're reviewing now, the Ice Lightning Sword, adds a flat 130 lightning damage to your weapon, and also 80 frost build-up for the duration of the buff that it applies. So it's a great way to give you both lightning and frost damage, whilst having 0 stats in Faith, Intellect, or Arcane. And as you can see, you call down a bolt of lightning into the blade and bring it down upon your foes. So you deal an initial slash with the blade itself, further damage with the lightning that comes down, and then the ice lightning effect persists in the weapon itself for the next 20 seconds. So this really is a triple threat and a weapon that I would love to use more, because the more I talk about it, the more I think this is absolutely awesome. Now we'll move into number 8 and take a look at Mogwin's Sacred Spear. You can get Mogwin's Sacred Spear by trading the Remembrance of the Blood Lord with Enya in Roundtable Hold, and you get this remembrance by defeating Mog, the Lord of Blood, in the Mogwin Palace. And now, taking a look at the Blood Boon Ritual, this skill is so incredibly badass. And not only does it coat your armament with Blood Flame for a while after using the ability, but you can spam this up to 3 times in a row, creating bigger and longer explosions with every single thrust. This is super powerful, and will stun pretty much everything in the area, doing incredible amounts of damage, leaving them very vulnerable, along with making you feel like a total freaking badass. At this point, and for the rest of the list, it was very hard to not put them all in the first position, so just because it's 8th, don't let that fool you into thinking that I don't rate it even more highly. It's just all of these remaining 8 weapons are so incredibly cool that it was really hard to decide what order to rate them all in. And with that being said, we'll now move into number 7, Morgoth's Cursed Sword. This one you'll already know that I love because I've used it quite a lot throughout the later parts of the Things You Missed series. You can purchase this from Finger Reader Enya by using the Remembrance of the Omen King, and you get that by defeating Morgoth the Omen King at Leindel Royal Capital. Why I love this so much is it's incredibly good at breaking enemies out of their attacks. You charge forward to deliver a diagonal slice, and the trail of blood that's left behind then explodes into flame. And an additional input will allow you to follow up with another slash in the other direction, leaving a second trail of flame. You can stun lock so many enemies to death with this. It's really quick, does a lot of damage, and looks cool at the same time. Incredibly awesome, albeit quite stat heavy, requiring 35 dex and 17 arcane, but I strongly recommend this one. Now we'll move into number 6, the Blasphemous Blade. You will already know how much I adore this weapon, and more specifically this Ash of War, if you've seen my top 10 Faith weapons, because this topped the list at number 1. So I will just very briefly skim over it here. You get this by trading the Remembrance of the Blasphemous with Enya, and you get that by defeating Rykard at the end of the Volcano Manor. And the few things that make the Taker's Flames so incredibly awesome in my opinion are the fact that not only is the range on this thing and the damage on this thing phenomenal, but every single enemy that it touches you steal health from. So you can honestly use this weapon art and never need to heal again. It's that good. I'll leave that there and move on to number 5, the Hand of Melania. This is another one I've used for a fair bit of the Things You Missed playthrough, specifically for the Crumbling Farum Azula. And what more do I need to say other than the fact that it lets you use the waterfowl dance, one of Melania's absolutely devastating ultimate abilities. And as the description says, perform a series of one-footed leaps in the manner of a waterfowl to unleash a swift yet graceful slashing combo, and repeated inputs allow for up to 2 follow-up attacks. This is the combo that just never ends. It does stupid amounts of damage, and you can buff it up with so many talismans, such as the Shard of Alexander and the Rotten Wing insignia, to make this absolutely devastating. Now onto number 4, Sword of Night and Flame. Just before I get into this one actually, I'd like to mention a couple of other weapons that 100% made this list, but I've deliberately left them out because they are so overused and so over-talked about that they were just way too obvious to put in the list. These include the Moonveil's Transient Moonlight, Corpse Piler of the Rivers of Blood, and the Dark Moon Greatsword's Moonlight Greatsword. Also, before we get into the top 4, a few other honourable mentions to Malekith's Black Blade, the Magma Worm's Scale Sword, and the Giant's Red Braid. As I say, there are so many incredible Ashes of War. I had to narrow it down somehow. So feel free to let me know if I've missed out your favourite in the comments. And now, without further ado, let's get back to the Sword of Night and Flame. There's no way I couldn't include this one on the list. The Night and Flame stance has two of the coolest animations this game has to offer. With a strong attack, you sweep the sword with a burst of flames that have a surprising range on them. And of course, you basically have a mini Comet Azure every single time you use the normal attack and cast the Night Comet sorcery. Two ridiculously powerful Ashes of War bundled into one. And if you've been playing Elden Ring since the start of the game, these have both been nerfed into the ground. They used to be so much stronger than they still are. And fun fact, just so you can get the absolute most out of this sword if you are using it, the Night stance with the Comet scales with intelligence and deals magic damage, and the Flame stance obviously deals fire damage and scales with faith. And for anyone that doesn't know, you can find this in a locked room in the Caria Manor. I show you exactly where to get it in the Things You Missed in Caria Manor video that you can go and check out down below. Now we are finally into the top 3. My picks for the top 3 Ashes of War in the whole entire game. At the start of the list, I was kind of basing this on aesthetics, how cool they look, how fun they are to use. So some of them would have been jiggled around a bit if I was purely looking at efficiency and how powerful they are. But I feel like these 3 would top any list. And my god, it was hard deciding which order to put these 3 in. So they are very interchangeable. Basically, all 3 of these are joint first. But first up, we have the Bolt of Gransax. This is an incredibly missable item in Lanedale Royal Capital. Make sure you grab it when you're there, because it cannot be acquired after you defeat Malekith. And its Ash of War, the Ancient Lightning Spear, is absolute god tier. This thing, not only can you charge it up to increase the power, but it has the most ridiculous range of any Ash of War. It might outrange everything in the game. The strength of the Ash of War scales with dexterity, it deals 100% lightning damage, and it will knock back enemies if fully charged. Be careful if you are using it to snipe things on the edges of cliffs, because it will move you forward slightly when you use it and you can fall off. Not that I'm speaking from experience. There's not much more to say apart from the fact that it looks amazing and it's definitely worth investing in. Now we'll move into number 2, Star Scourge Greatsword. This is the boss weapon of Star Scourge Radahn. Of course it's going to be incredible. You acquire it by trading the Remembrance of the Star Scourge with Enya, and it comes equipped with the Starcaller Cry. You bring the 2 swords together and roar into the skies, pulling enemies towards you and dealing damage to them with a gravitational wave. And for anything that somehow survived that initial attack, you then follow up with an additional input to slam down with your now gravity-infused swords, dealing tremendous amounts of damage. It's just awesome. There's nothing more to say apart from this is incredibly badass, and only trumped by the number 1 spot on this list, the Sacred Relic Sword. To get this weapon, you have to have completed the game. So the fact that completing the game does reward you with something so awesome makes me very happy. Because if this reward was quite lackluster, that would leave a sour taste, wouldn't it? You need to trade the Elden Remembrance with Enya to get the Sacred Relic Sword, and my god is it worth it. Its unique skill, the Wave of Gold, imbues the sword with a holy light that you then release and fire at foes in a wide golden wave that fans out, sweeping, getting bigger and bigger, dealing devastating damage to anything caught in its path. You can use it to one-shot huge groups of enemies and rune farm insane amounts of runes very quickly. It does have a 2-second charge, so you are very susceptible to getting interrupted if you are trying to use this at close range, but it is so powerful and incredibly effective in so many situations. Fully leveling up this weapon, speccing hard into Faith, and then using spells and talismans such as the Golden Vow and the Shard of Alexander, you can basically one-shot anything, even in New Game Plus. That is it for my list of my favourite Ashes of War in the game. Please let me know if you agree. Please let me know if you have any other favourites that I haven't covered. I'd love to hear. And with that, I hope you have an amazing day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.